Most people think emotions are facts, that if they feel it, it must be true. If they feel rejected, they must be unworthy. If they feel hurt, someone must be to blame. If they feel anxious, something must be wrong. But Alan Watts believed otherwise. He believed that pain is not in the event. It's in our attachment to how things should have been. That suffering isn't born from what happens, but from our resistance to what happens. You only suffer because you believe things should be different. Not because they are, but because your idea of how life was supposed to unfold didn't match reality. And it's in that gap between expectation and truth that emotional chaos takes over. We live our lives interpreting reality through a lens of personal narrative. Someone doesn't text back, we take it as proof we're unwanted. A friend cancels plans, and suddenly we spiral into stories of abandonment. A comment feels off, and it ruins our entire day. But Watts would say, what if the emotion isn't about the moment, but about your resistance to it? What if pain is not a signal of danger, but a signal of grip? Your grip on how things were supposed to go. And what if the most powerful thing you could do is loosen that grip? To become emotionally untouchable, Watts didn't say you need to become numb. He said you need to become fluid, like water, able to bend, to feel, to move without holding. Because the moment you hold on to an emotion, the mind builds a story around it, a narrative. And now the emotion isn't just energy moving through your body, it's identity. I'm not just hurt, I'm someone who always gets hurt. I'm not just angry, I'm someone who can't trust anyone. This is how the ego survives, by making pain personal. Watts taught that emotions are like weather, passing conditions of consciousness. They only linger when you resist them, when you clench, when you rehearse them with thought. But when you observe them, without judgment, without clinging, they pass. Not because you fixed them, but because you didn't feed them. This is what emotional mastery actually looks like. Not control, but presence. The ability to witness your emotions as visitors, not permanent residents. This is where most people get stuck. They think becoming emotionally strong means being unshakable. But Watts would say, emotional untouchability doesn't come from building walls. It comes from dropping resistance. The more you resist, the more stuck you feel. The more you allow, the more free you become. And yes, that's terrifying, because allowing means letting go of your stories, your certainty, your need to assign blame. But on the other side of that letting go is something rare, peace that isn't dependent on anything. You've been conditioned to believe that your emotions are who you are, but they're not. They're waves on the surface. You are the ocean underneath. And the more you identify with the ocean, calm, vast, unshaken, the less power those surface ripples have. Watts taught that the self is not the thinker, not the feeler. The self is the awareness behind it all. And when you remember that, you become untouchable, not because nothing touches you, but because nothing sticks. Why the ego is addicted to pain, and the only way to disarm it. Alan Watts understood something few spiritual thinkers dared to say out loud. The ego is addicted to suffering, not because it enjoys pain, but because pain reinforces identity, and identity for the ego is everything. Think about it. Every time you're hurt, there's a voice inside that says, "See, this always happens to me." Every time you're rejected, another voice whispers, "I knew I wasn't enough." These are not neutral thoughts. They're loops that the ego clings to, because without them, it doesn't know who it is. Watts believed the ego is not some villain. It's a useful fiction, a mask we wear to function in the world, to navigate roles, names, responsibilities. But the problem is, most people mistake the mask for the whole self. And when you identify too tightly with that mask, you start defending it like it's sacred. You defend your story, your pain, your image. And that's where emotional vulnerability becomes emotional fragility. Because anything that challenges your story, a comment, a silence, a shift, feels like a threat. This is why so many people walk through life constantly triggered. They think it's the world hurting them, but often it's their ego protecting a wound it refuses to release. And until you disarm that cycle, you stay reactive. Your nervous system stays hijacked. You keep thinking the next person, job, or situation will finally give you peace. But Watts would say, the peace doesn't come from fixing the world. It comes from dropping the mask. When you disidentify from your pain story, something radical happens. You feel the emotion, but you don't become it. You feel anger, but you don't speak from it. You feel sadness, but you don't drown in it. You feel fear, but you observe it instead of obeying it. That's not numbness. That's consciousness. That's what Watts meant when he said suffering isn't in what happens. It's in the belief that it shouldn't have happened. The ego believes it should always be safe, respected, loved. But the soul knows that life is dynamic, uncertain, ever-shifting, and that nothing real can be threatened. So, how do you disarm the ego? Start by noticing its favorite narratives. No one listens to me. I always get hurt. They never care. These aren't truths. They're scripts. The ego recites them to stay alive. But you can rewrite the script, not by forcing positivity, but by observing the loop without playing along. Ah, here's the old story again. That one sentence breaks the trance. Watts would say, stop trying to be the perfect person who's never affected. Be the presence behind the reaction. That's how you step out of the cycle. That's how you stop being manipulated by your own interpretations. Because at the deepest level, no one can make you feel small without your participation. And when you stop participating, the pain passes, the ego quiets, and what remains is peace. How to feel everything without letting it control you. Most people think emotional strength means feeling less. Alan Watts believed the opposite. True emotional resilience, he said, isn't about feeling less, it's about feeling everything, without letting it own you, to feel grief without collapse, to feel rage without revenge, to feel loneliness without spiraling. This isn't numbness, it's freedom. And it's a freedom that begins not when you suppress emotion, but when you stop identifying with it. When a wave of emotion hits, anxiety, sadness, frustration, the ego's instinct is to say, this is me, and so you react. You lash out, you shut down, you spiral, not because the feeling is too strong, but because your identity fused with it. You weren't feeling anger, you were angry. You weren't experiencing fear, you became fear. And the moment that fusion happens, emotional pain controls your entire nervous system. You're no longer responding to reality. You're responding to the story you've attached to the sensation. Watts taught that the art of freedom is the art of non-identification. Feel it all, but be none of it. Witness every emotion fully, but know you are not the emotion. You are the awareness beneath it, the ocean beneath the wave. And the moment you anchor into that awareness, your reactivity dissolves. You no longer need to shut the feeling down, because you realize it can't drown you. You're bigger than it. This doesn't mean detachment. It means intimacy with yourself, to feel deeply without gripping tightly, to stay grounded while your inner weather shifts. This is the practice of emotional alchemy, turning chaos into clarity. And it's not a gift for the enlightened few. It's a skill anyone can learn, once they stop resisting the storm and start watching it pass. So how do you live this in real life? You let emotion arise without rushing to assign meaning. You breathe. You pause. You ask, what is this feeling asking me to notice? And then you feel it fully, not intellectually, but somatically, in the body, without narration, without judgment, without clinging. You feel it, and you let it go. And if this content is making sense to you, then click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Alan Watts didn't teach that we should escape emotion. He taught that we should stop being ruled by it, that the key to becoming emotionally untouchable isn't to avoid life, but to meet it completely, without losing yourself in it. You're not here to suppress your feelings. You're here to become the kind of presence that can hold anything, without being destroyed by anything. The calm behind it all, and the end of emotional hijacking. There's a calm beneath all of it. Beneath the fear, the longing, the noise, there's a part of you that's never been touched by the world. Alan Watts believed this, that underneath all identity, performance, and pain, there is a space of pure awareness, a still point. And when you drop into that space, even for a moment, something powerful happens. The chaos doesn't stop, but your reaction to it does. You realize you've been living on the surface, letting the waves toss you around, forgetting that you are the ocean. This is the end of emotional hijacking. Not because you avoid life, but because you finally return to the center of it. Watts didn't say your problems would vanish. He said your suffering would. Because suffering, at its core, is the belief that you need something to be different before you can feel peace. But what if peace isn't conditional? What if it's underneath the condition, waiting to be remembered? You don't need to fight your emotions. You don't need to perfect them. You just need to witness them from the calm behind it all. That calm is not passivity, it's power. It's the presence that allows everything and clings to nothing, that watches fear arise and pass like a cloud, that sees grief and doesn't run from it, that sits in discomfort and simply breathes, not to fix, but to be with. That's emotional mastery, not the absence of feeling, but the end of being ruled by it. When you live from this calm, people around you change, not because you change them, but because your energy no longer feeds their chaos. You become a mirror, a pause, a reminder that peace is possible even here, even now. You stop leaking your stability for temporary validation. You stop being hooked by other people's urgency. You start moving like someone who trusts life, even when it's uncertain. That trust, that's what makes you untouchable. Alan Watts didn't give formulas. He gave you freedom. He reminded you that your essence was never the pain, never the story, never the emotion. It was the awareness that allowed all of it, the space that could never be broken. And the more you live from that space, the less reactive you become, not out of numbness, but out of knowing. You're not your fear. You're the presence that notices fear. You're not your shame. You're the witness of shame. And if you can feel that, not just understand it, but feel it, you unlock something most people never touch: unconditional inner stability. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're remembering, returning, reclaiming your inner ground. So trust that the video YouTube shows you next, the one appearing now, is not random. It's the next doorway, the next layer, and it will meet you exactly where you are. If this resonated, take a moment to subscribe. Drop a comment below, not for the algorithm, but to mark this chapter in your journey. We'll see you in the next depth. Depthoria continues.